If you ever want to understand heartbreak, look into the eyes of someone who's lost everything they loved. On a gray April afternoon, 16-year-old Elijah Carter stared out the window of his sister's Honda as the car rolled past the county line. Every mile marker, another punch to the gut. The Carter Ranch, which once seemed endless, now felt like the edge of the world, a place where dreams came to die, and memories haunted the air like ghosts. It had been 3 years since the accident. Elijah still remembered the shrill whinny of the horse, the wet grass, the split second before everything shattered. His mother's voice, always steady, had become a phantom echo, impossible to silence but impossible to hold on to. The doctors did their best, but no surgeon could heal the limp in his right leg or the deeper wound that left Elijah feeling hollow. He'd become the boy with the brace, the one who avoided mirrors, the one who flinched whenever he heard hoofbeats on asphalt. Next to him, Harper drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. She was 22, recently graduated, sharp-edged and practical. A survivor in her own right. Her jaw was set, lips thin, her gaze never leaving the road. "We won't be here long, Eli," she said, not looking at him. "Just long enough to sort Mom's things, meet with the realtor, and get this place off our backs." Elijah didn't answer. The ranch had always been his mother's domain, her sanctuary, her pride, her undoing. After her death, everything turned to dust, and horses were sold off. The barns grew cobwebs. The fields grew wild. Now Harper wanted closure, an ending, a sale. Elijah he didn't know what he wanted, maybe just one more day pretending things could go back to how they were. The car crunched up the gravel drive. The house looked smaller than he remembered. The paint peeling, the porch sagging. Beyond it, paddocks stretched into the distance, weeds choking the fence posts. The air smelled of damp wood, old hay, and the memory of summer afternoons. It was too quiet. Inside, the house was a mausoleum, everything untouched, exactly where their mother had left it. The air felt heavy, like it might collapse if you breathed too hard. Harper wasted no time. She moved through the rooms briskly, snapping pictures for the realtor, jotting notes, talking about repairs and value, and maximizing the estate. Elijah wandered, tracing his fingers over dusty picture frames, the faded blue ribbon from the county fair, the bridle still hanging by the back door. Eventually he drifted outside, the screen door creaking behind him. The barn stood like a forgotten cathedral, its red paint flaking in sheets, doors swollen shut from disuse. Elijah hesitated, his heart thumping, a mix of dread and longing. He could almost hear his mother's laugh, see her waving him over, smell the apple slices she'd sneak to the horses when she thought no one was looking. He limped across the yard, the brace on his leg squeaking softly, and pushed open the side door. Inside, shafts of light filtered through holes in the roof, illuminating motes of dust. The air was sharp with the scent of old straw and manure. In the gloom, stalls lined the walls, most empty, a few holding forgotten buckets and chewed halters. Then, in the farthest stall, something moved, a dark shape shifting against the shadows. Elijah squinted, heart racing. A horse? Or what was left of one. The animal stood awkwardly, black coat dulled with dirt, ribs faintly visible under its skin. A blaze of white split its face, and one hind leg hung slightly off the ground, twisted from an old injury. The horse looked at him, one ear flicking, wary and exhausted. Elijah froze. This was Shadow, his mother's favorite, the horse that used to lead every parade, the one she'd said was half wild, half wonder. After the accident, Shadow had been locked away, too unpredictable, too damaged, too much a reminder of all they'd lost. A wave of guilt crashed over Elijah. How could they have forgotten him? He stepped closer, careful, hand outstretched. Shadow flinched but didn't bolt. Their eyes met. A long, silent exchange between the broken and the lost. A cough echoed from the tack room. Elijah turned, startled. An old man emerged from the gloom, gray-bearded and hunched, but with shoulders broad as an oak. Clint Wheeler. His voice was gravelly, impatient. "Didn't think anyone would bother coming back here." Elijah stammered. I didn't know you were still around. Clint snorted. Not much reason to be, except him. He jerked his chin at Shadow. You Carter kids just up and left, but horses don't forget. Neither do trainers. Clint had trained Elijah's mother, coached her through every championship and every heartbreak. But after he'd refused to dope a horse for a big race on principle, he was blacklisted, pushed out, left to rot on the sidelines. Now he was just another relic. Like Shadow. Like Elijah himself. Harper's voice carried from the yard. Eli, are you out there? She sounded annoyed, impatient. Elijah hesitated, torn between the familiar pull of his sister's urgency and the silent plea in Shadow's eyes. He turned back to Clint. Does he have a chance? Clint eyed him for a long moment, then shrugged. That depends on you, on him, on whether either of you's got anything left worth saving. The words stung, but Elijah couldn't deny their truth. He watched as Clint limped over to Shadow, gentling the horse with a firm but careful hand. For the first time since the accident, Elijah felt something, a flicker, a pulse, the faintest spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, what was broken wasn't beyond repair. He stayed in the barn long after Harper called him back, long after the sun began to set and the wind picked up. He listened to the sounds of the ranch at dusk, the creak of beams, the soft snort of Shadow, the steady rhythm of Clint's footsteps. He let himself remember what it felt like to belong to a place, to a family, to a world that hadn't yet fallen apart. As darkness settled, Elijah made a silent promise. To Shadow, to Clint, to himself. He wouldn't let the past decide the future. Not for the horse, not for the ranch, not for himself. The story wasn't over. Not yet. The morning after their arrival, Elijah awoke before sunrise, startled by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He lay in the quiet bedroom, his old room, though the posters on the wall had faded, the trophies dusty, the comforter still faintly carrying the smell of summer grass and hay. For a while, he just listened to the house creak as if it, too, was stretching off a long sleep. Downstairs, Harper was already at the kitchen table, scrolling through listings on her laptop, phone pressed to her ear. She wore a blazer over her pajamas, determined to look put together for the realtor meeting later that morning. She barely glanced up as Elijah limped into the kitchen. Coffee's in the pot. You okay? Yeah, Elijah said, pouring himself a mug, though his hands trembled. I want to check the barn. Harper frowned, her mouth tightening the way it always did when the subject of horses came up. We need to meet with Mr. Dorsey at 9. He wants to do a walkthrough. Don't get caught up out there. Elijah just nodded, but his heart was already out the door. He shrugged into his jacket, tugged the brace into place, and let the screen door slam behind him. The air was crisp, laced with dew, and that earthy smell you only get in the country. Soil, cut grass, the musk of rain clouds threatening above. It was the kind of morning his mother had always loved. The barn seemed to greet him with a skeptical creak as he entered, dust swirling in his wake. Clint was already there, as if he'd never left. He stood at the end stall, working his way through an old feed bag, humming a country tune so low Elijah could barely catch it. Shadow stood in the stall, his head hung low, mane tangled and eyes wary. The black horse shifted, testing his weight on the bad leg. Elijah reached out slowly, remembering what Clint had said. You don't break a broken horse. You walk beside him until he forgets he's broken. He stood there, just outside the stall, silent. No sudden moves, no reaching for the halter, just presence. Clint watched him out of the corner of his eye. You planning on just staring at him all summer? The old man grumbled, but there was a wry smile behind the beard. I don't want to scare him, Elijah replied quietly. He's not scared of you, boy. He just doesn't know who you are yet. They worked in near silence. Elijah helped refill the water buckets and swept the aisle, his limp slowing him, but not stopping him. He watched as Clint checked Shadow's leg, talking all the while, not to Elijah, but to the horse, his voice gravel-soft and patient. Easy, fella. We've both seen better days, huh? A sudden movement at the door caught Elijah's eye. A girl about his age, wearing scrubs and mud-stained boots, stepped inside. Her dark blonde hair was tied back in a messy braid, and she held a tote bag stuffed with bandages, ointments, and syringes. She paused, sizing up the scene. Clint nodded. Elijah, this is Ivy Bennett. She's a vet tech. Lives at the farm next door. Knows more about horse medicine than most of the local vets. Ivy set the bag down by the stall. Her gaze landed on Elijah's leg, then flicked to Shadow's, then to Clint. He's still limping, she observed, her tone brisk but not unkind. Clint shrugged. Old injury, new neglect. We do what we can. Ivy knelt, murmured something low to Shadow, and gently lifted the horse's bad leg. Shadow snorted but let her work, nostrils flaring. Ivy examined the fetlock, pressed along the tendon, then stood. I'll mix up some anti-inflammatories. I can come back later to show you how to wrap it. Thanks, Elijah said, feeling strangely grateful for her calm efficiency. She nodded, slinging her bag over her shoulder. For a split second, her tough exterior faltered. My cousin used to ride here. Before, she trailed off, eyes clouding. Just take it slow, for his sake, and yours. She left as quickly as she'd come, boots leaving prints in the soft barn dirt. Elijah looked after her, sensing the weight she carried, the way tragedy shaped everyone around this ranch. Clint grunted. She's a good one, that girl. Smart, stubborn, knows what it's like to lose. Elijah worked the rest of the morning in the barn, falling into an old rhythm, cleaning stalls, feeding, listening to Clint's stories, feeling the knot in his chest begin to loosen. Every so often he'd talk softly to Shadow, offering a handful of hay or simply his presence. Sometimes the horse would flick an ear in his direction, an almost imperceptible sign of trust. Just before noon, Harper stormed into the barn, her heels sinking into the mud. She held a manila folder stuffed with legal documents and wore the look of someone who'd been told no one too many times that day. Eli, we need to go over these papers. The realtor says the place is a mess. We have to get rid of everything. Horses, tack, all of it. Elijah's jaw clenched. What about Shadow? He's old, injured. No one's going to buy him. Harper's voice softened, almost apologetic. I know it's hard, but we can't afford to keep this place afloat. It's just not practical. Clint bristled. That horse is worth more than you know. Harper, Carter, he was your mother's heart. That's exactly the problem, Harper snapped back, her voice breaking. None of this brings her back. It's just pain. Elijah looked at Shadow, then at his sister. He saw the grief etched into her, the exhaustion, the desperate need to move on. But he also felt something stubborn rising inside him, a refusal to let go, to let another thing die on the ranch. I'm staying, he said quietly, surprising himself as much as Harper, at least for the summer. Shadow deserves a chance, and so do I. Harper stared at him, stunned, anger flickering in her eyes before giving way to resignation. Fine, do what you want, but don't expect me to clean up the mess when it all falls apart. She stormed out, leaving Elijah in the silence, his heart pounding but his mind clear for the first time in years. Clint clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. Took guts to stand up to her. Your mother would be proud. Elijah spent the rest of the afternoon outside, walking the fence line, inspecting sagging rails and rusty nails. Each step was a reminder of his limits, but also of his determination. He paused at the old oak tree, where he and his mother used to watch sunsets, and let himself remember not just the pain, but the laughter, the hope, the possibility that healing might still be found here. As the sun dipped low and the shadows lengthened across the ranch, Elijah limped back toward the barn. Shadow waited in his stall, dark and silent, a mirror of Elijah's own scars. But for the first time, Elijah didn't see just brokenness. He saw a chance for both of them to find their way home. For days, Elijah moved through the ranch in a half-dream, tethered to a past he couldn't outrun, but now also caught by a growing sense of responsibility that made every sunrise matter again. Each morning, before Harper stirred, he would limp out to the barn, boots thudding softly over the dew-soaked grass, the air thick with mist and the metallic promise of rain. And the old boards creaked under his weight, but the scent of hay and horses welcomed him, stirring memories both bitter and sweet. Shadow always waited, eyes wary but not wild, the pale white blaze down his face giving him a look of dignity even in neglect. The black horse still favored his left hind leg, shifting awkwardly as Elijah approached. But every day, Elijah felt a subtle change, a flicker of curiosity in Shadow's gaze. The way he didn't flinch as quickly, how his ears swiveled at the sound of Elijah's voice. Harper barely spoke to him, pouring her energy into phone calls, cleaning, and making endless lists. Sometimes Elijah heard her at night, muffled in the kitchen, weeping when she thought no one was listening. He wanted to help her, to make her see what he was starting to see, that sometimes saving something broken could save yourself too. But her walls were thick, and for now, Elijah focused on what he could control. Clint was always there. The old trainer moved slower than he used to, but his hands were steady and his mind sharp as a tack. "You want to help that horse?" he'd growl, handing Elijah a stiff brush or a bucket of feed. "First, you got to let him know you're not the enemy. Forget all that's how him whose boss is nonsense. Horses are like people. Some you can lead, some you have to walk beside." The words stuck with Elijah. He remembered the sharp, competitive lessons from his childhood. Train hard, never show weakness, dominate the animal. But that was before the accident, before the pain that lingered in his bones and the deeper ache of fear. Now, instead of trying to control Shadow, Elijah tried to listen, to be patient, to let the horse come to him, one small step at a time. On the third morning, as he mucked out Shadow's stall, Ivy appeared again. Her face was set in its usual mask of calm professionalism, but she didn't ignore him. "You've got a stubborn patient," she observed, nodding at Shadow as she set down her vet kit. "So do you," Elijah replied, attempting a smile. She didn't quite return it, but her eyes softened. She worked quietly, checking Shadow's leg, replacing the poultice, moving with practiced hands. "He's got old tendon damage," she said, almost to herself. "You can't fix what's torn, not completely. But you can build around it. Give him a reason to move, even if he's afraid." Elijah nodded, realizing she was talking about more than just horses. Ivy lingered that morning, watching as Elijah tried to coax Shadow out into the round pen. The black horse balked, planting his feet, trembling. Clint leaned on the fence, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You're asking him to trust you," Clint called out. "But you got to show him you trust him too. Don't pull, just walk. Let him follow if he wants." Elijah hesitated, then dropped the lead rope, turning his back to Shadow and walking slow, careful steps around the pen. At first, nothing. Then the faintest sound, hoofbeats behind him, hesitant, then more sure. Shadow followed, head low, matching Elijah's awkward, limping stride. A circle, then another, slow, as a prayer. Something inside Elijah loosened, a knot of grief, fear, guilt, just enough to let in a sliver of hope. Ivy clapped softly. "Not bad, Carter, not bad at all." Later, as Ivy packed up her things, Elijah found himself wanting her to stay. "You ever ride anymore?" he asked, her face shut down, the light in her eyes flickering out. "No. My family. We lost someone. My cousin rode here years back. I haven't been near a saddle since." "I'm sorry," Elijah said, meaning it. Ivy nodded stiffly. "Just take care of yourself. Horses can break more than bones." After she left, Elijah felt the loss, the loneliness that came from being surrounded by ghosts. Still, he couldn't ignore the sense that maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to wake up, to want things again, to believe that something good could still happen, even here. The days passed in a rhythm of small victories and setbacks. Elijah learned to watch Shadow's moods, the way his nostrils flared at a sudden sound, the way he'd relax when Elijah hummed under his breath, the way he let Elijah scratch his withers. There were bad days, too, times when Shadow reared away from a touch, or when his leg gave out and he nearly fell, sending Elijah's heart racing with guilt and fear. But Clint always stepped in, steady as bedrock, guiding both boy and horse with a patience that surprised Elijah. "You're both fighters," Clint told him one evening as they leaned against the stall, watching the sun bleed red over the fields. "Trouble is, you're both scared to let anyone see you're hurting. It's all right, you know. Ain't no shame in pain. The shame's in quitting." That night, Elijah wrote in a battered old journal he found in his closet, something his mother had given him, its first pages filled with her slanting script. He wrote about Shadow, about the fear and the hope, about the feeling that maybe, in helping this broken horse, he was finding pieces of himself again. He stayed up late, listening to the quiet house, the distant sound of Harper's restless footsteps, the wind moving through the trees, and he wondered what it would take to make her see what he was beginning to see. He wondered if Ivy would ever let herself hope again. He wondered if he could ever forgive himself for surviving, for still wanting to try. At dawn, Elijah woke before the alarm, heart pounding, eager to start again. Out in the barn, Shadow waited, ears pricked, eyes bright. Elijah opened the stall, and for the first time, the horse stepped forward on his own. Nosing Elijah's shoulder, breath warm and steady. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A flicker of purpose, burning in the ashes of grief. And as Elijah set to work, he felt something shift inside, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the pieces of his life could be put back together, one quiet morning at a time. Building trust isn't a thing that happens in a flash, especially when both the boy and the horse carry so much history on their shoulders. For Elijah, each day was a balancing act between pain and perseverance, between fear of falling and the stubborn urge to try again. For Shadow, every encounter was a test. Would this time be like the last, or could he trust that this new beginning wouldn't end in disappointment? The days began to lengthen. The summer sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist that clung to the lowland fields. Elijah fell into a rhythm, letting the routines of ranch life shape his hours. He woke at dawn, shrugged into worn jeans and a flannel shirt, and limped his way across the yard. At first, every step hurt, but the movement became its own form of medicine. A reminder that pain was just another kind of persistence. Clint was always waiting at the barn, usually elbow deep in some stubborn repair job, or critiquing Elijah's shoveling skills with gruff humor. "You missed a spot," he'd grumble, pointing at a patch of straw with his cane. "Don't make Shadow think you're lazy, boy. Horses know when you're cutting corners." Elijah laughed more easily around Clint than he did with anyone else. The old man had a way of making the hard things seem almost simple. When they worked together, Elijah felt less alone, like he was part of a team, even if it was just the three of them in a barn full of ghosts. But it was Shadow who really measured Elijah's progress. At first, the black horse refused to come when called, staying planted in the darkest corner of his stall, eyeing Elijah with suspicion. Clint offered advice from the doorway, arms folded over his chest. "Don't go in with expectations. Just go in. Let him come to you when he's ready." So, Elijah did. He'd pull up a stool and sit just inside the stall, reading aloud from whatever book he'd grabbed from the house, sometimes a battered Western, other times just the sports section from an old newspaper. At first, Shadow barely twitched an ear, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to edge closer, nostrils flaring as if searching for something familiar in Elijah's voice. On the fifth morning, something shifted. Elijah read for nearly an hour, his voice soft and steady, ignoring the ache in his leg and the sweat pooling at his collar. He paused, feeling eyes on him, and looked up. Shadow stood less than a foot away, his breath warm on Elijah's cheek, ears pricked forward, curious and alert. Elijah held his breath. He didn't reach out, not yet. He just smiled, letting the moment stretch. When Shadow finally snorted and nuzzled his arm, Elijah felt a surge of joy so sharp it nearly undid him. That night, over microwave leftovers, Harper eyed Elijah warily. "You're spending a lot of time out there," she remarked, trying to sound casual. "You know the realtor called again, right? He wants to show the place this weekend." Elijah set his fork down. "I'm not ready," he said quietly, and Shadow isn't either. Harper sighed, pushing her hair behind her ear. "We can't keep dragging this out, Eli. This place, it's just memories. Painful ones." "Not all of them," Elijah said, his voice firmer than he felt. "Some are good. Some are worth holding on to." She didn't respond, but he saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The next day, Ivy showed up again. She was less brisk than before, her voice gentler, though her eyes still held the shadow of old wounds. She watched as Elijah led Shadow into the round pen, the lead rope slack, his movements patient and slow. "You're doing better than most," she told him, her voice low. "A lot of people try to force it, make the horse obey. But Shadow, he's not the type you can bully." "I'm not sure I ever was, either," Elijah replied, a wry smile on his lips. Ivy knelt by the fence, watching as Elijah walked beside the black horse. At first, Shadow's limp was pronounced, his steps hesitant, but after a few laps, he settled, falling into a tentative rhythm. Elijah didn't push. He just kept pace, talking softly, offering encouragement without demand. Clint joined them, nodding approvingly. "That's the way. Let him set the pace. Let him decide when to trust again." Later, as Ivy checked Shadow's leg and rewrapped the bandage, Elijah asked, "How did you get into this? Working with horses, I mean." Ivy paused, hands busy but face distant. "My dad was a trainer. My cousin was his pride and joy. When she died, everything changed. I stuck around because I didn't want to lose. This is all of it, you know? Sometimes it feels like if I can help just one horse, maybe it's worth it." Elijah nodded, understanding in a way he hadn't before. Days slipped by. Each one brought a new challenge, a summer storm that rattled the barn and sent Shadow into a panic, a missed step that left Elijah sprawled in the dirt, laughter echoing from Clint, who just handed him a clean rag and said, "Get up, son. The world ain't waiting on you." But each challenge brought growth, too. Elijah learned how to listen, to Shadow, to Clint, to the land itself. He learned that trust was earned, not given, and that the process was sometimes more important than the result. One evening, as fireflies sparked in the fields and the barn glowed golden in the setting sun, Elijah sat on the fence, legs dangling. Shadow grazed nearby, finally venturing into the open pasture without hesitation. Harper stood beside him, silent for a long while. "He looks better," she said at last. "He is," Elijah replied. "So am I." She didn't argue. She just put a hand on his shoulder, squeezed, and watched the horse with him as the last light faded. Inside the barn, Clint finished sweeping the aisle, a satisfied look on his weathered face. "You keep at it, Elijah. Some folks say you can't teach an old horse new tricks, but I say you just have to remember the ones. He already knows." That night, Elijah slept deeply, dreams filled with the sound of hooves and laughter, the barn alive again with possibility. For the first time in a long while, he believed in second chances. Not just for Shadow, but for himself. And maybe, just maybe, for everyone at the ranch. Even as the days brightened and trust slowly grew between boy and horse, shadows lingered in the corners of the ranch, cast not only by memories, but by the stubborn ache of relationships stretched thin and hearts uncertain where to turn. Harper was the first storm Elijah had to weather. She watched him from a distance, arms folded, lips pressed into a hard line as he devoted hour after hour to Shadow and the barn. One evening, as thunder rolled in the distance and the lights flickered in the kitchen, Harper finally snapped. "You're doing it again," she said, voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "Throwing yourself into horses and forgetting about everything else. School, your friends, your life." Elijah bristled. "This is my life. Shadow needs me, and I need this." "You sound just like Mom did." Harper's voice cracked. Look what happened to her, Eli. How many times do I have to watch someone I love risk everything for these animals? That's not fair, Elijah shot back, pain sharp in his chest. This is different. I'm not her. I'm not reckless. But even as he spoke, he could see the fear in his sister's eyes, the grief she still carried, the loss that never left. Harper wasn't just angry. She was scared. She didn't want to lose Elijah, too. For the first time, Elijah tried to see things through her eyes. Harper had given up college plans, put her life on hold, became the adult before she was ready. He thought of all the times she'd driven him to physical therapy, or sat in cold waiting rooms while he stared at x-rays, silent and withdrawn. She hadn't given up on him, even when he tried to give up on himself. The realization left him raw, but he didn't know how to fix it. So, like always, he went to the barn. But the tension with Harper was only part of it. Ivy, too, began to withdraw. Where once she'd lingered after wrapping Shadow's leg, or stayed to share stories about her cousin, now she made excuses to leave quickly. She returned texts late, if at all, and when she was present, her eyes darted nervously, as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. One afternoon, as Elijah led Shadow around the paddock, he found Ivy standing at the gate, arms crossed tight, face clouded. "Ivy," he called, pausing beside Shadow. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated. "My uncle came by last night. He said he saw you riding. He's worried. My whole family is. You know what happened to my cousin. They're afraid you're tempting fate." Elijah felt a rush of frustration. "It's not the same, Ivy. I'm not." She cut him off, voice shaking. "You don't know that. Nobody ever thinks it'll happen to them until it does. I can't watch it again. I can't lose another friend to a horse." For a long moment, neither spoke. Shadow snorted, shifting restlessly. Ivy looked away, blinking fast. Elijah swallowed hard, his own doubts rising. Was he pushing too hard? Was he putting himself, and Shadow, in danger for something that could never be healed? The old ache in his leg throbbed, a constant reminder of what could go wrong. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Elijah tossed in bed, replaying Harper's words, Ivy's fears, the memories of his mother's accident gnawing at the edge of every thought. In the dark, the line between courage and recklessness blurred. The next morning dawned heavy and humid, storm clouds pressing down on the ranch. Elijah moved through chores in a haze, distracted and short-tempered. Shadow seemed to feel it too, ears pinned, tail swishing, eyes rolling white, with every clap of thunder. Clint watched them both, his own worry hidden behind gruff commands. In the afternoon, Clint called Elijah into the tack room. The old trainer leaned on his cane, expression serious. "You're losing focus, son. That horse feels everything you feel. If you're scared, he's scared. If you doubt, he'll doubt. You want to help him, you gotta find your center first." "I don't know how," Elijah admitted, voice barely more than a whisper. "Everything's coming apart." Clint nodded, surprisingly gentle. "It's grief. Don't play fair. You gotta go through it, not around it. Let yourself feel it, but don't let it drown you. Horses teach us that. Every day's a new start, but only if you show up for it." Elijah spent the rest of the afternoon alone, in the barn, brushing Shadow in long, rhythmic strokes, breathing in time with the horse's slow exhale. He tried to let go of the anger, the guilt, the fear. Little by little, the tension ebbed. But just as he was starting to find calm, disaster struck. He'd led Shadow out to the paddock, the air thick with static and the promise of rain, when the horse suddenly spooked. A crack of thunder sent him rearing up, eyes wild, hooves slashing the air. Elijah froze, instincts warring with fear. In that split second, Shadow's front hoof clipped Elijah's shoulder, knocking him hard to the ground. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, and for a moment Elijah couldn't breathe. Clint and Harper came running, Harper's face white as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Are you okay? Eli, are you okay?" Elijah struggled to sit up, cradling his arm. Shadow danced nervously a few yards away, head high, breathing fast. "I'm fine. Elijah gasped, forcing a shaky smile. Just knock the wind out of me. Harper's anger and fear spilled over at once. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You could have been killed. Don't you get it? This has to stop. Clint knelt beside Elijah, steadying him. Accidents happen, but you're not quitting, are you? Elijah shook his head, fighting tears. No, I can't. Harper turned away, unable to watch. Ivy, standing by the fence, looked stricken, torn between running to help and running away. The storm finally broke, rain lashing the barn roof, as Elijah limped inside, soaked and shivering, but still standing. That night, he sat in the dark, the pain in his shoulder, a dull throb, and tried to make sense of the chaos. He realized that healing wasn't just about trust between him and Shadow, but about mending the fractures between himself, Harper, and Ivy. As lightning flashed outside, Elijah made a silent promise. He wouldn't give up. Not on Shadow, not on his family, not on himself. But he had to find a way to bring them together, to show them that sometimes facing the pain was the only path forward. He drifted to sleep with the storm still raging, but somewhere deep inside, hope flickered. Tomorrow would come, and with it, another chance to begin again. It happened in the darkness, a night thick with the threat of summer storms, when every window rattled and the clouds pressed so close to the earth that even the ranch dogs huddled in their beds. Elijah lay awake, listening to the wind sigh around the house, rain pattering against the roof. His shoulder ached from the day before, the memory of Shadow's rearing fresh in his mind, but it was his heart that kept him from sleep. He kept replaying Harper's panicked voice, Ivy's fear, and the look in Shadow's eyes as the thunder crashed. A look that mirrored his own, wild, desperate, trapped between past and present. When the first real crash of thunder shook the windows, Elijah flinched, adrenaline surging. Then, a sharp noise, a clang and a frantic whinny, cut through the storm. He sat bolt upright. Something was wrong in the barn. Without a second thought, Elijah grabbed his raincoat and limped outside, wind tearing at the loose flaps, rain stinging his cheeks. The yard was a blur of shadows and streaking rain. Lightning illuminated the barn, and for a split second Elijah saw the side door hanging open and something dark moving wildly inside. He burst into the barn, the scent of fear overwhelming. Shadow was rearing and plunging, eyes rolling white, kicking out against the walls. The stable door, battered by Shadow's hooves, sagged on its hinges. Another crack of thunder sent the horse crashing backward, his legs skidding and buckling beneath him. "Shadow!" Elijah shouted, his voice trembling. He scrambled for the halter but nearly slipped on the wet straw. He moved slowly, hands open, heart hammering. He remembered Clint's words. "Don't break a broken horse. Walk beside him until he forgets he's broken." But right now, Shadow had forgotten everything except terror. The old trainer's voice was nowhere to be heard. Clint must have slept through the first chaos. Or maybe the storm kept him trapped in his little cabin on the edge of the property. Elijah was alone. The next flash of lightning sent Shadow surging again, and with a sickening thud, the horse slammed his bad leg against the door frame, then half collapsed in the straw, sides heaving. For a moment, Elijah thought Shadow wouldn't get back up. Panic twisted in his gut. If Shadow's leg was ruined, if after all this, he'd pushed too far, he didn't leave. Elijah knelt in the straw, soaked through, whispering, "Easy, buddy. I'm here. I'm not leaving you." He stroked Shadow's neck, ignoring the trembling in his own hands, the ache in his leg, the rain leaking in through the roof. Outside, the storm kept raging. Inside, Elijah stayed with Shadow, gently untangling the horse's leg from a fallen rope, running careful hands along the swollen tendon. He couldn't tell if it was sprained, torn, or just bruised. All he knew was that the horse was in pain, and so was he, and right now, that pain connected them. Hours passed in that dim barn. The storm came and went, thunder fading to a distant rumble. Elijah lost track of time, just listening to the horse's breathing and his own heartbeat. When exhaustion finally began to drag him down, he slumped against Shadow's side. The horse's warmth, his only comfort. That was where Harper found him at dawn, curled up in the straw, half frozen, hair matted with rain and mud. Her anger dissolved at the sight. Worry and something softer replaced it. She knelt beside him, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Elijah," she whispered, "let's get you inside." "I can't leave him?" Elijah murmured, shivering. "He hurt his leg. I think it's bad." "We'll call Ivy," Harper said, her voice decisive. "But first, you need to warm up." Reluctantly, Elijah allowed her to help him into the kitchen, where she wrapped him in blankets and made him drink hot tea, her hands steady even as her face was pale with fear. "You could have gotten sick out there. Or worse." "I couldn't let him be alone," Elijah insisted, voice hoarse. Something shifted between them, a brittle wall cracking just a bit. Harper brushed his wet hair off his forehead and squeezed his hand. "You're stubborn, just like Mom, but you're not alone, Eli. You don't have to do this by yourself." A few hours later, Ivy arrived, out of breath and wide-eyed, carrying her medical bag and a thermos of coffee. She took one look at Shadow's leg and whistled softly. He did a number on it, but it's not hopeless," she said after a long exam. "He'll need rest, cold compresses, and maybe some anti-inflammatories. And you, Elijah Carter, need to rest too." Clint hobbled in as Ivy was finishing up, his hair wild from sleep, face lined with worry. "Didn't think I'd sleep through a hurricane," he muttered, guilt flashing in his eyes. "Should have been here." "We managed," Elijah said, more bravely than he felt. Clint looked at both the boy and the horse, each battered, each refusing to give up, and nodded. "Guess you did." The day was spent nursing wounds, Shadow's and Elijah's. Harper surprised them all by rolling up her sleeves and helping Ivy mix liniment and wrap Shadow's leg. She didn't complain, didn't say a word about the realtor or the mess in the house. Instead, she worked quietly, shoulders tense but resolve clear, as the barn filled with the scent of herbs and the quiet murmur of voices. Elijah felt something powerful. Gratitude, yes, but also a strange sense of relief. For the first time, Harper was helping because she wanted to, not out of obligation. For the first time, they were a team again, bound by care instead of tragedy. Later, as the sun crept through the ragged clouds and the storm clouds rolled away, Elijah leaned against the barn door, sipping Ivy's coffee. She joined him, arms folded, watching Shadow doze under a blanket of fresh straw. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "you're a mess, Carter. But you're not as alone as you think." He smiled, the exhaustion lifting for just a moment. "Neither is he." That evening, with the sky a deep, forgiving blue, and the land shining with rain, Elijah let himself hope. The setback had been real, the pain, the fear, the doubt, but it had brought them together in a way nothing else could. Harper, Clint, Ivy, Shadow, each of them scarred, each of them stubborn, each of them choosing to stay. As he walked back to the house, shoulder to shoulder with his sister, Elijah felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the quiet thrill of belonging. No matter how many setbacks, he wasn't giving up. Not on Shadow, not on himself, not on the possibility that, together, they could find their way forward. A warm hush settled over Whisper Valley in the days after the storm. The clouds thinned and sun broke through, laying gold over the ranch, as if the land itself was offering a brief reprieve. It was a time of slow healing, not just for Shadow's injured leg, but for hearts still raw and relationships that had survived their own tempests. Elijah woke late the morning after the long, sleepless night in the barn. His body ached in new and old places, but the familiar sense of dread was gentler now, replaced by a quiet gratitude. For the first time in years, he heard Harper humming in the kitchen as she cooked eggs, the tune familiar from childhood. There was peace in the sound. When he limped out to the barn, Shadow lifted his head with a faint whicker. The horse's leg was bandaged, his movements stiff, but he greeted Elijah with a warm nudge. Clint was already there, cleaning tack and grumbling good-naturedly at the flies. Harper soon joined them, surprising everyone. She wore her old jeans and their mother's faded barn jacket, her hair tied back with a piece of blue ribbon. She looked nervous but determined. "I'll help with the morning chores," she said, and there was no edge to her voice, just resolve and maybe the hint of a truce. The mood shifted. The barn, once a place of loss, now felt alive with possibility. As they worked together, feeding, cleaning, checking on Shadow, Elijah felt the distance between him and his sister shrink. Their conversations turned practical, even warm. She asked questions about Shadow's care and listened when Elijah explained. She even teased Clint about his legendary stubbornness, and the old trainer laughed louder than Elijah had ever heard. Ivy arrived mid-morning, hair damp from the shower, cheeks pink with resolve. There was a new gentleness in her eyes as she examined Shadow's leg, checking the swelling, and then, unexpectedly, she squeezed Elijah's hand. "You did good, Carter." "He's healing, and so are you." He swallowed, emotions catching in his throat. I couldn't have done it without you." She hesitated, then sat beside him on the hay bale. The barn was warm, dust motes spinning in the sunlight. I was wrong to pull away," she confessed, voice soft. "I was scared, still am, sometimes. I didn't want to see someone else get hurt. But watching you with Shadow, it reminded me why I loved horses in the first place, why I stayed here, even after everything." Elijah looked at her, feeling the same mixture of fear and hope. "It's easier with you here for all of us." Ivy smiled, brushing stray straw from her sleeve. "You know, the Whisper Valley Hope Derby is coming up. It's not about winning. It's about connection, about second chances. You should enter. Shadow, too. You'd be surprised what a day like that can do for the heart." He blinked in surprise. I don't know. He's barely healed. I'm not sure we're ready." "Maybe you'll never be ready," Ivy replied, her voice taking on a teasing lilt. "But maybe that's the point. Sometimes you have to show up. Scars and all." Clint, who'd been eavesdropping while pretending to polish a bridle, cleared his throat. "Well, if you're gonna do this derby, you'll need a coach. Guess I'm as close to a legend as you're likely to get around here." Elijah grinned, feeling a surge of excitement and terror. "You'd do that? Even after all these years?" Clint's eyes twinkled. "Son, redemption doesn't come to those who wait for permission. I've spent too long on the sidelines. If we're going to do this, we'll do it right, but we do it together." The idea of the Derby spread through the ranch like wildfire. Harper listened in as Clint laid out a schedule. Nothing too intense, just enough to rebuild trust and confidence in both horse and rider. She even found herself getting swept up in the excitement, offering to sew a blanket with their mother's initials for Shadow to wear. Ivy committed herself too, showing up early to help with training, offering medical advice, and always reminding Elijah to go slow, to listen to his own limits as much as Shadow's. She spoke honestly about her cousin's accident, her fear of losing again, and found comfort in the fact that here, with these people, she could start to heal as well. For Elijah, each day of training was a lesson in humility and hope. He learned to read Shadow's body language, the twitch of an ear, the subtle shift of weight, the way the horse's whole body relaxed when Elijah's touch was gentle and patient. They practiced simple obstacles, short trots, slow turns, never pushing, always allowing for mistakes. Clint's coaching was equal parts tough love and wisdom. "You can't force a miracle," he'd say, voice stern, "but you can build the bridge for it to cross." He insisted on small, daily victories. When Shadow balked at a new fence, they'd try again tomorrow. When Elijah's leg hurt too much, they'd rest. Progress was slow, but every morning the spark in both boy and horse shone a little brighter. As the Derby approached, word spread around the valley. Old neighbors stopped by the ranch to offer encouragement or to watch practice from a distance. Some remembered Shadow from years past, when he and Elijah's mother were an unbeatable team. Others just liked the idea of rooting for an underdog. One evening, after a long day of training, Elijah found Harper in the barn, running her hand along Shadow's neck. She looked at her brother with a new softness. "You're different," she said. "Stronger. Happier even. I didn't know if we could ever get back to that." Elijah smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "I think we're all finding our way again. Together." That night, the family ate dinner at the kitchen table, laughter replacing silence for the first time in years. Clint stayed late, telling stories of the old days. Ivy leaned in, a smile on her lips, and even Harper let herself relax, her gaze lingering on the photos of their mother lining the mantel. The storm had broken them, but in its aftermath, they found a chance to rebuild. Second chances didn't erase old scars. But they offered something better. The hope that, even after everything, you could rise again. And as Elijah drifted to sleep, his dreams were filled not with fear, but with the image of Shadow running free beside him, the wind carrying them both toward a future shaped by courage, forgiveness, and the power of choosing each other again and again. Race day dawned in Whisper Valley with a gentle haze, sunlight streaking pink and gold through the cottonwood trees. The Hope Derby wasn't the kind of event that drew crowds from the city or made the news, but for the Valley's horsemen and for Elijah, it felt like the most important day of the year. Elijah barely slept the night before, excitement and nerves tangled in his chest, leaving him restless, pacing the kitchen at midnight and listening to the quiet hum of Harper's sewing machine upstairs. At dawn, he found Harper already up, smoothing creases from the custom blanket she'd made for Shadow, a simple navy fabric stitched with their mother's initials in golden thread. She didn't say much, just handed it to him with a soft smile and a look that said everything. Pride, fear, hope. The ranch felt alive that morning. Clint was all business, barking reminders about water buckets and spare reins, his own nerves hidden beneath gruff orders. Ivy arrived early, checking Shadow's leg one last time, then double-checking Elijah's brace, her touch gentle, but her words firm. "Listen to your body. Listen to him. This isn't about winning. It's about finishing together." Elijah nodded, his gratitude for Ivy deeper than words could express. For weeks she'd been his anchor, steadying him through setbacks and doubts, and now her steady presence made the morning feel possible, even if only barely. As they loaded Shadow into the trailer, a handful of neighbors gathered by the fence, calling out encouragement. Old Mr. Dobbs, who'd ridden with Elijah's mother in the Derby years ago, handed him a lucky penny. "For good fortune. But you make your own luck, son." The drive to the event grounds was short, but Elijah's thoughts stretched miles. The Derby grounds were set at the far end of the valley, nestled between green hills and a slow, winding creek. The track was modest, a mix of dirt and grass, outlined by white rails and ringed by wildflowers. The crowd was small, families sprawled on blankets, kids running with sticky fingers, riders warming up in dusty paddocks. As Elijah led Shadow from the trailer, he felt the weight of every eye. Some were kind, curious, supportive. Others whispered, their glances lingering on Shadow's limp and Elijah's uneven stride. And Clint clapped Elijah's shoulder. "Let 'em talk. They see what's on the surface. They don't know what it took to get here." But the whispers grew as they walked toward the starting gate. Elijah overheard snippets. "Isn't that the Carter boy? That's Shadow, right? Didn't he used to be a champion? Washed up, both of them. Why even try?" The words stung, each one a reminder of all the reasons he'd almost given up. His hands trembled as he checked Shadow's tack. The old fear returned, fear of falling, of failing, of letting everyone down. He turned away from the crowd, head bowed. Ivy appeared at his side, eyes fierce. "Hey, look at me, Elijah." He did, surprised by the intensity in her voice. "They don't see the work you put in. They don't see the scars you carry. Make them look again." Her words hit deeper than the whispers. Elijah nodded, jaw set, determination flickering to life again. "Thank you, Ivy." for believing in us. Always, she replied. Go show them who you are. As the riders lined up, Harper came running, breathless, her hair wild, their mother's old barn jacket billowing behind her. Wait, she called, holding up the blanket. Elijah smiled, helping her drape it over Shadow's back. The crowd quieted at the sight, recognizing the Carter family emblem, once a symbol of victory, now a symbol of resilience. Clint gave a final nod of approval, then stepped back. It's your turn, son. Trust your horse. Trust yourself. Elijah mounted up, heart pounding. He could feel Shadow's tension, the tremor in the horse's muscles, but also the trust that had taken months to build. As the starter called them forward, Elijah closed his eyes, breathed deep, and let go of everything but the moment. The starting horn sounded, and they were off. At first, Shadow stumbled, his limp more pronounced on the churned-up dirt. Elijah heard a gasp from the crowd, but he didn't panic. He steadied his breathing, loosened the reins, and let Shadow find his own rhythm. They settled into the pack, not leading, but not falling behind either. Elijah resisted the urge to push, remembering Clint's advice. Ride with calm and grace. Let him set the pace. The first turn came up fast. A younger horse jostled Shadow, and for a moment Elijah feared disaster. But then Shadow's ears flicked back, as if seeking Elijah's reassurance. And Elijah leaned in, whispering, It's okay. I'm here. They rounded the corner, slow but steady, every stride a small victory. Halfway through, the pain in Elijah's leg flared. Sweat broke out on his forehead, and for a heartbeat, doubt nearly won. But then he saw Ivy by the rail, waving, her eyes bright. He saw Harper in the jacket, hands pressed to her mouth in hope. He saw Clint, arms crossed, nodding once, proud and unyielding. He remembered his mother, her laugh, her courage, the way she'd always said, Finish what you start, Eli, even if you're last to cross the line. The memory carried him forward, stronger than pain. Shadow seemed to feel it too. His stride lengthened. He wasn't fast, never would be again. But he was proud, his head high, coat gleaming. Together, they moved as one, not fighting the course, but flowing through it, steady and sure. As the finish line neared, Elijah realized they were not at the front, but for the first time, he didn't care. The goal wasn't to win, it was to finish, on their own terms. The crowd's applause grew, not just for the winners, but for every horse and rider who made it. When Elijah and Shadow crossed the line, a roar went up, shouts, whistles, even a few tears from old-timers who remembered the Carter legacy. A few minutes later, as the judges tallied points and handed out ribbons, the announcer called for everyone's attention. This year, we introduce a new honor, the Heart of the Derby Trophy. Awarded to the horse and rider who show the greatest resilience, partnership, and spirit. Elijah barely heard the rest before Clint and Ivy were hugging him, and Harper was crying, and Shadow stood tall, ears pricked, the blanket with their mother's initials shining in the sunlight. As the announcer handed Elijah the trophy, a simple plaque, but heavy with meaning, he felt something lift inside him, like sunlight breaking through clouds. He looked at the faces around him, his family, his friends, his horse. The crowd saw him now. Not just the limp, not just the past, but everything it had taken to come this far. Later, as the sun set and the valley glowed, Elijah sat in the quiet barn, Shadow's head resting on his shoulder, the trophy at their feet. Ivy knelt beside him, Clint leaned against the door, and Harper sat on a hay bale, humming that old tune. For the first time, Elijah believed, deep down, where it mattered most, that he and Shadow had truly come home. As the applause from the Hope Derby faded, Elijah sat on Shadow's back at the edge of the field, caught in the afterglow of something he'd never imagined possible. The crowd was breaking up, neighbors hugging, families carrying their tired children and folding chairs, while sunlight shimmered on the prize ribbon clipped to Shadow's bridle. It wasn't blue or red, but gold and white, the Heart of the Derby Trophy, gleaming not for speed but for resilience. Elijah slid off Shadow's back, his leg aching, but his heart light as air. Clint appeared first, grinning beneath his weathered hat. Told you, the best kind of victory isn't about winning, but about showing up. He clapped Elijah on the shoulder, proud but gentle, careful of the fresh bruises and the deeper wounds that had finally started to heal. You showed 'em, kid. You and that stubborn horse did something folks'll talk about around here for years. Ivy hurried over, tears sparkling in her eyes. She wrapped Elijah in a hug so sudden he almost lost his balance. You did it. I knew you would. I just knew it. You proved it to all of us. Her arms lingered a moment, the kind of embrace that says things words can't. Shadow nuzzled her arm, as if offering his own thanks. Harper was last, weaving through the crowd, still wearing their mother's barn jacket. She didn't try to hide her tears. I'm so proud of you, Eli. Mom would have been too. She pulled him close, and for a second Elijah let himself lean in, letting her strength become his own. They walked together back towards the barns, Shadow stepping carefully but with his head high, the crowd's well wishes trailing behind them. Riders called congratulations. Old-timers clapped Clint on the back, and more than one neighbor stopped Harper to say the Carters were back. Different, maybe, but stronger for it. At the barn, they settled Shadow into a fresh stall. Elijah brushed him down, careful around the bandaged leg, whispering thanks and promises for the future. The horse stood quietly, eyes closed, as if savoring his own victory, a testament to trust, patience, and the belief that broken things could be made whole again. As evening set in, the Derby crowd gathered for a potluck on the grass. Paper lanterns swayed overhead, laughter rose with the fireflies, and the heart of the Derby trophy sat in the center of the table. Someone passed Elijah a plate of cornbread and fried chicken, and for the first time in years he felt truly hungry, not for food, but for life itself. Conversation buzzed around him. Some people told stories of races lost and found, of horses gone and remembered. Clint sat with old friends, his banter loud and infectious, finally free from the shadow of disgrace that had haunted him since the championship scandal. He caught Elijah's eye and winked, as if to say, "See? Second chances come around if you hang on long enough." Ivy found Elijah again beneath the lanterns. "Do you realize what you did today?" she asked, quiet but with a smile that said she already knew. "You changed people's minds. About you, about Shadow, about what matters most." Elijah looked at her, then out over the field, the sky streaked with stars. "I think I changed my own mind, too. For so long I thought I'd lost everything after Mom died. But now it feels like we found something new. Or maybe it was here, all along, waiting for us to come back." She slipped her hand into his, not shy anymore. "That's what hope is, Eli. Coming back. No matter how many times you fall." The night deepened, but the feeling of victory lingered. Deeper than a trophy, broader than applause. Elijah thought of all the mornings spent struggling, the nights doubting, the pain and the healing, and the moments when giving up had seemed easier than trying again. But as he looked at the people gathered around him, Harper, Clint, Ivy, and Shadow, he knew every step had led him here, to this moment. Harper joined them, cheeks flushed, her eyes softer than he'd seen since before the accident. "I was wrong, Eli. I thought selling the ranch would set us free, but maybe this place is what kept us together." She glanced at the barn, the dark outlines of the paddocks, the mountains in the distance. "Maybe it's time we stop running from what happened and start building something new." Elijah squeezed her hand. "I'd like that. Maybe we could start a program, rehab horses, help other kids who've been through hard stuff." Harper smiled, her old spark returning. "We could name it after Mom. Sarah Carter Training and Hope Foundation has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Clint overheard, his grin stretching wide. "Count me in. I got a few tricks left to teach, and a lot of stubborn left to share." Ivy nodded. "And I'll be your first volunteer." They laughed. The sound warm and true, carried up on the night breeze. For a while, they just sat there, sharing memories and dreams, letting the weight of the past fall away. Later, as the crowd thinned and the lanterns flickered low, Elijah slipped away to the barn. He found Shadow dozing, ears flicking as Elijah approached. He laid his head against the horse's neck, breathing in the warm, familiar scent. "Thank you," Elijah whispered, "for not giving up, for letting me try again." Shadow shifted, soft and steady, and in that quiet barn, Elijah finally felt at peace. He realized the true victory wasn't the trophy or even finishing the race. It was everything they'd gained together: trust, family, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. He stayed there a long time, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night, the distant laughter, the horses shuffling in their stalls, the wind in the trees. In that moment, he knew that while the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, it would always be worth walking, especially if you had people and a horse to walk it with you. Sunlight crept over Whisper Valley, chasing away the cool fog and bringing with it a new kind of quiet, one that felt like promise, not loneliness. The day after the Hope Derby, Elijah woke to birdsong and the low, comforting sound of horses in the paddock. For the first time in years, he didn't feel a heaviness pressing on his chest. He sat up slowly, listening to Harper moving around in the kitchen, the steady rhythm of a life mending itself. By the time Elijah made it outside, Harper was already in the barn, mucking stalls with an energy that surprised him. She turned, hair loose around her face, eyes bright. "You sleep in, or just taking your time?" she teased, the old playfulness returning. He grinned. "Just making sure the world didn't end overnight." She tossed him a broom. "Nope, still here, and you've got chores." The barn bustled with life. Clint was showing Ivy how to repair a broken latch, her hands steady as she listened, occasionally rolling her eyes at his exaggerated stories about wild colts and crazier cowboys. The old trainer looked different, the shoulders straighter, laughter easier, as though the Hope Derby had returned something he thought lost forever. Shadow watched it all from his stall, one ear forward, his coat gleaming after a good brush. His bandaged leg was healing, and while he'd never race again like in his prime, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that no one could deny. Elijah slid open the stall door, reaching up to scratch Shadow behind the ear. "Morning, partner," he whispered. "Ready to see what comes next?" They'd earned that peace, but the world kept turning. News of Shadow's return and Elijah's story had spread farther than they'd realized. That morning, as the family gathered for breakfast, Harper read aloud from an email sent by the Derby's organizer. "We'd like to feature your family and Shadow's journey at next year's event. We think it might inspire others." Clint chuckled, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "Well, look at that. The Carters are famous." Elijah smiled, but there was something deeper in his gaze, an awareness that fame wasn't what mattered, but what they did with it. "We should use it for something good," he said. "Help other families, other kids, horses that need a second chance." Harper looked at him, proud. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already talked to the lawyer. No more selling the ranch. I want to turn it into a sanctuary, just like Mom dreamed. Rehab, training, maybe even a summer camp." Ivy reached across the table, taking Elijah's hand. "I'll help, and I'll spread the word at the clinic. There are so many animals and people who need a place like this." Clint nodded. "If you think you're getting rid of me, you're wrong. I want in. I've still got a few tricks, and I'm not ready for retirement. Besides, someone needs to keep you kids out of trouble." Laughter filled the kitchen, warm and genuine. In that moment, Elijah saw his mother's dream taking shape, and not as a memory, but as something alive, moving forward. The days that followed were a flurry of work and hope. Harper researched grant programs and drafted a new sign for the gate. The Sarah Carter Sanctuary, a place for second chances. Clint taught writing lessons to neighborhood kids, his sharp eye catching every mistake, his gentle encouragement building confidence in riders who'd never believed in themselves before. Ivy organized vet check days and helped set up a small clinic in the old tack room. And Elijah found himself at the center of it all, mending fences, training horses, sharing his story with anyone who needed to hear that healing was possible. For Shadow, life was quieter, but no less meaningful. He became the ranch's gentle giant, a symbol of endurance and resilience. Whenever a new horse arrived, spooked and scarred, Shadow would be there, steady and calm, leading by silent example. Elijah saw himself in every frightened animal. And every time he watched Shadow reach out to them, he felt a little more whole. The summer unfolded with purpose and laughter. Children came for riding lessons and therapy sessions. Parents lingered by the fence, and neighbors offered to help paint the barn or repair the old hayloft. The Carter's Ranch became a hub of community, a place where sorrow was met with kindness, where failures turned into fresh starts. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the valley in gold, Elijah walked out to the paddock. Harper joined him, leaning against the fence, her eyes on the horizon. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked, voice thick with emotion. Elijah shook his head. "Some days I thought we'd never make it out of the dark. But I think that's the point. If you keep walking, even when it's hard, sometimes you find your way home." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I think Mom would be proud." He squeezed her hand. "She'd be prouder of you." A gentle breeze carried the laughter from the house, the soft nickers of horses, the sense of something larger than loss. Ivy appeared, waving them in for supper. Clint called from the porch, warning that his famous chili would get cold if they didn't hurry. The ranch was alive. Family, friends, hope growing in the rich earth beneath their feet. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Elijah wrote a letter to his mother. He wrote about the pain, the healing, the joy of finding Shadow, and the gift of second chances. He wrote about Harper's courage, Ivy's kindness, and Clint's loyalty. He wrote about the sanctuary they'd built, the dreams they'd reclaimed, and at the end, he wrote, "I'm still limping, but my spirit gallops. Thank you for teaching me to love what's broken and never give up." He placed the letter in the old oak tree at the edge of the property, where his mother used to sit and watch the sunset. As he walked back to the house, fireflies danced along the path, and he felt her presence, gentle, proud, everlasting. Elijah knew there would be setbacks, hard days, old griefs that rose up in unexpected moments, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Not anymore. He had his family, his friends, and the unbreakable bond with a black horse who'd taught him how to rise again. As the ranch lights flickered off, the story of Elijah and Shadow became more than a memory. It became a legacy, a promise that healing comes not from fixing what's broken, but from finding something broken like you and learning to rise together. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Sometimes the end is just the beginning.